And so we're just going to kick things off. So those of you who are here, thank you for joining us today. We have myself, Duane, and then we have Karen Woodman from 24 Hour Bookkeeper. And today we're going to talk about that lovely topic of job costing and how it impacts your bottom line. So again, my name is Duane Dufault. I'm the head of sales over at ClockShark. And so I went to college actually for construction management. I grew up in a family construction business, and I was a project manager. I grew up in the industry doing a lot of different stuff. And so I made full tilt switch about 10 years ago into the business side of the world. And so I've got firsthand knowledge of swinging the hammer, running the business and all that stuff. And so it's an interesting combination being at ClockShark because that's the industry that we serve. And then today joining us, we have Karen Woodman from 24 Hour Bookkeeper. So go ahead and talk about yourself.
Well, I mean, basically, you could call me the chief cook and bottle washer with an awesome team, right? So I'm definitely the visionary side of 24 Hour Bookkeeper. We partner with construction clients, helping them take on the workload of the financial management side of their business, which is much more than just money in, money out, you know? Yeah. And I'm a big QuickBooks person, and definitely have a great relationship with Intuit and these software apps. So we live in the world of integration and construction management on the financial side. So
awesome. And it's odd. It's not odd, but it's interesting that you specialize in that, because I feel like even today there's so much disconnect with technology and the construction world. And it was like that 15 years ago when I was in the business with my family. And so with the leaps and bounds of technology, you would think that there would be a big transition to it, but there's still a lot of friction in that specific area of the business. And then again, before we go, we have two helpers on the back end, so that way you guys can get your questions answered. So it's not just us rambling on and on. We have Felicia, who's one of our marketing specialists from ClockShark. She actually spent her first part of the career at ClockShark as a customer support rep. So she was helping all of you lovely people with anything you had questions about when it came to ClockShark. And she's a QuickBooks Pro advisor, so she knows a thing or two about how to run and connect the business. And then Karen, you want to introduce Michelle?
Michelle, she is our production general manager. She basically runs all of our bookkeeping teams in training, customer experience, just making sure the wheels are turning in the right direction. So
yes, massively important. I remember when we didn't have anyone managing anything in my parents' business.
Yeah.
It's crazy how much stuff is missed. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. A couple pieces of housekeeping before we go. We will definitely send you the recording of this webinar and a bunch of other lovely additions to that. It'll be sent out tomorrow from ClockShark and from 24 Hour Bookkeeper. Throughout the webinar, you can submit your questions. Bottom of the screen, there's going to be a little Q&A box. You can put those in. Really, if they're really good questions or relevant to what we're talking about, we'll probably grab that and talk about it live between Karen and I. And then, of course, Felicia and Michelle will be on the back end, help fielding those via the chat. And throughout the presentation today, we will have poll questions to get some feedback directly from you in live time. So what's going to happen, the questions will be up on the screen and we'll read them out loud. So that way you can go and submit your responses. So that way we can kind of figure out what's going on in your neck of the woods. So the agenda today, we're going to talk about what is job costing. What are the areas or the types of costs, how each affects your business, the common things that we hear both from the ClockShark end of things and from the accounting side of things from 24 Hour Bookkeeper, the most common roadblocks, and the tips for better job costing. So jumping right into it, it's going to be our first poll question. How do you track your job costing? And you can select all that apply. So the answers are paper, spreadsheets, email, your memory, or with an app. So again, how do you track your job costing? You can click all that apply. Good old fashioned paper. You can use spreadsheets, and that's Google Sheets. It can be Fresh Sheets. It could be Excel, or do you somehow email it to yourself or others? Do you try to remember it all, or do you use some fancy app to do that? Like I know QuickBooks has an integration with Expensify. That was something that I used a long time ago. Snap pictures of the receipts and such.
And if you're not job costing, it's okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully after this webinar, we'll encourage you to start in baby steps with it, right?
Yes.
So it's okay if you're not yet.
Yeah. Okay. Give people a couple more seconds. Yeah. If you're not doing it, we'll cover some reasons why. Kind of hope hopefully we shed some light on that, because I know one of the reasons that always kept us from job costing when I was not only working in the industry, but my parents' business was just, you don't know where to start. There's so many different things. Like when you open up the accounting, when it comes time to taxes, there's like, where do I start? Right. So
Yeah.
hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on that. So
Yeah.
thank you. I really appreciate everyone participating. And interesting enough, it was almost a tie between spreadsheets and just an app. So that's good. At least people are doing something. That's better, literally better than nothing. Those of you who are using paper, I'm sorry. Jumping right into it. So what is job costing? Karen, what is your definition of job costing?
Well, we could go the traditional ways of, getting into the nitty gritty, like the specific terms, but today I just really wanted to be the idea of job costing in general. So job costing is putting in systems and processes to make sure that you're finding out if you're making money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, what are your costs against your revenue or your estimates? And are you spending all this time on these projects and making money, right?
Yeah.
Like that's really what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I mean, we all got in business for a reason. I mean, we all like swinging hammer and putting up trim around cool cabinets and stuff and making cool things. But at the end of the day, we got in business for ourselves because we wanted to make some money. We want to be in control of that. And all too
You want to
often,
make it worth it.
Yeah. It's a lot of effort. You spend a lot of time. It's your entire life that you do this. And if you're not able to take home a paycheck because you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, that's not enjoyable. And so job costing just gives you the insights on how your business is functioning.
Right. So if I can just add to that, in general, I think when you think of job costing in your business, first of all, we know that it's hard, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to almost change a mindset to say, okay, I want to make sure that my time away from my family or the stress that I'm having and doing everything I'm doing every day is worth it. Yeah. So you really should be thinking about, like you said, robbing Peter to pay Paul. A perfect example of that is I got $100,000 on this project. Mm-hmm. I got paid. I put in a request, I got paid. I really don't know how much of that $100,000 really belongs to me.
Yeah.
Right. Or I'm taking some of this money from this project to pay this other project. If you incorporate job costing in your business, you're really helping kind of level that out to where you have a really good idea of where you are on each project, 100%. Where your money sits from the revenue side, from the cost side, because you've got other things like payroll, right? Other overhead costs that you have to manage. So
I mean, it's a perfect segue. And the next topic is, what types of costs are there? Like, what are the types of costs when we're talking about job costing? So you're going right into it. So the materials, the biggest expense, your employees, the labor side of it, right? Yeah. Your subcontractors, who's working on your job sites that aren't technically your employees, and where is that costing going? Workers' compensation, small tools and equipment. Like, what are some of the biggest areas that you see, maybe not gaps, but maybe issues with people tracking?
Definitely W-2 employee direct labor. Right? My guy's on a job, or gal is on a job working. I really don't know if they're spending all their time on that job. And think about like the time in between jobs, right? Yeah. Or the time, at the shop versus on the job, things like that. And then just really understanding that when you are job costing, you have to think of it like, if let's say I'm building a house, everything that it takes to build that house would be a direct cost. And I know we're going to maybe go into some detail with that, but it's all the pieces that come with that. Yeah. So it's not necessarily like your QuickBooks subscription, for example, right? But it's anything that is relevant to the project in which you're, working on.
Yeah. And on the employee side, I mean, that's what ClockShark kind of specializes in, is the labor allocation to jobs. We hear a lot, we don't need time tracking because all of our employees are salaried. Yeah. Okay. So do you understand exactly what you just talked about? Do you understand how much indirect cost is coming from the labor on those jobs? Do you understand where your cost is going from job to job? So you know how much of that $100,000 is actually yours versus wages or materials. And so if you're salaried, that's great, but you still need a way to allocate the time so you understand where it's all being spent.
And when it comes to things like tools and equipment, when we think of that, and I think workman's comp can fall in this category too, sometimes people are not really sure is that an overhead cost, right? Is that a direct cost?
Mhm.
You know, and we'll try to cover some of that, but in reality, you have to recognize that like you wouldn't be buying that hammer if you weren't working on construction projects,
100%.
right? You wouldn't be buying a mop bucket if you didn't have a cleaning business.
Yeah. I mean,
So
it's really hard to justify my PlayStation for a construction project, though. The
that
accountant
would
doesn't
be
like that.
hard. So I'm just going to pretend you didn't say that. No, just kidding. So you just have to really, from a simple basis, think about what are the costs that are associated with your project or your business that if you didn't have a job or revenue, you wouldn't have those costs, right? That's really what you're job costing.
Exactly. Just breaking it down to really understand where everything's at. Another poll question coming up, poll question number 2. How often do you track your costs? Daily, weekly? Is it twice a month, once a month? Is it at the end of each project or whenever my bookkeeper asks? Again, how often do you track your costs? Daily, weekly, twice a month, once a month, end of each project, or when you get told to?
Should have added the when my shoebox is full.
Yeah.
Maybe. Hopefully not.
Oh
I'm not, and I'm gonna say that's less and less, but
yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, it still happens, and it's okay.
I think it's pretty standard. I mean, I have friends that own, small construction businesses. They're handymen, maintenance guys that have 2 to 3 employees, and I'll go over to their house every now and then to have a beer or, a cold beverage. And their garage is their office, and it's just filing cabinets spilling with receipts. It's like, it's the 21st century, right?
Well, and I'm just going to add this to it. A client told me the other day, which I thought was hilarious. He said, I know it's time for me to cost my receipts when my wallet is too thick and I can't sit on it.
Oh my God.
I mean, that's real life, right?
Yeah.
So
that's impressive. I wish I could say that with cash. It's time to go to the bank when there's too much cash flow.
Yeah. Problem. A horrible problem.
Well, again, thank you for participating. I love the engagements, and we got a lot of people answering. And the winner, hands down, is at the end of each project. For me, that's kind of scary. Like, what if your project is 6 months long? How do you understand where do you understand where your project is in that moment? Like a work in progress report. Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let me just add this. As a basic scenario, what if you have a line item? Let's say it's carpentry, maybe would be, trim, something like that, right? Just basic carpentry. If you wait till the end of the project, you actually don't know if you're going to go over under budget on that line item.
Exactly.
And as much as it's good to do it at the end of the project, and we're not saying that that's a bad thing, but you have an opportunity to manage those costs real time and adjust or pivot appropriately. Maybe if we have a little bit more frequent management of those costs.
Well, not only materials, but on the labor side, let's say you've got, 10, 15 different employees, and you've got your team lead or your crew lead who gets paid $30 an hour. And you send him or her out to a project, but you don't know how much budget you have left over on the job. And in reality, you're getting close because you overspent on carpet, and you need to send out one of your entry-level technicians that make $15 an hour, so that way you can remain under budget or at least not lose money. But you're never going to know unless you're running that consistently.
Yeah. So we have to be looking at our costs, not just recording them.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Said I sound like a talk show host.
You do.
But anyways, the end of project stuff, I think it makes sense if you have a lot of short-term projects, like if you are a 1 or 2 man shop and you're doing small bathroom remodels or you're doing maintenance jobs, like that makes sense because one job could be 3 hours. Like that would make total sense. But it's interesting to see what happens when you've got a long-term project. Like, how do you manage what we just talked about?
Yeah.
Okay. So how each costs affect your business. Good segue. There's labor, like we said, labor, material, subcontractors, indirect, and overhead. But the purpose of repeating these ones is how they affect your business. Like, where do they come into play, and how does it affect it when you don't track these things? So labor, for example, so Karen, what do you see, and how does this affect the business?
Okay, so profit margin, perfect example, right? So when you look at we'll just use even markup just to make it even a little bit easier than that. Most people would say, okay, well, I expect that I am making about 10%, 20%, whatever the number is, right? if you record your costs, you're able to manage that to make sure you're on track. That would be, I think, one thing in just from a financial standpoint, putting it in, recording it, you can see where you fall. Because a lot of times people are like, I know where my costs are in the mental bank. Great. That's a great place. However, sometimes when we put numbers down into an accounting software or construction software, whatever, it's interesting what happens when we see it visually. Because sometimes there's little pieces that we don't think of or we don't know about or whatever that may be. So I think profit margin is definitely one big area that you can see that affecting what you're doing. So
I think that's how most of these affected. If you look at materials, subcontractors, I feel like subcontractors is the one that always kind of gets away. Is you don't realize it until you get the invoice and you're like, oh, cool, I broke even on that job. I don't get paid. And then the indirect stuff. But with the overhead, we had a question come up a little bit ago that I saw kind of scrolling through the feed. Like how do you tie overhead back to the business? And like, how do you see that typically affecting a business from your experience?
I would say that's one of the main questions we get is, hey, I want to tie in overhead and I just don't know how to do that. You know, so there is some work involved with that, but ideally, again, back to what we were saying earlier about being in business, not because the sky is blue. We want to make sure that we cover all of our costs, our operating costs. So how do we put that in? So it's a matter of coming up with what the numbers actually are, maybe putting it as a percentage, and adding it to say hour, you know, so for every hour my guys or gals work, I'm going to add X amount of dollars to that time. And that covers my overhead. Or on every project, I'm going to add, you know, X amount of dollars or a small percentage because that would cover my overhead. So when that's like going a little bit deeper in job costing and everyone kind of wants to get there. But if you, again, don't have your costs recorded, even on the overhead side or managing your numbers regularly, it would be a little bit tough to do that. I was going to add one thing too with this is a benefit of job costing these things is making estimating better. You know, so when you think of estimating a job, ideally, if you could look at a previous job and see how you did, that's awesome. And sometimes depending on kind of, you know, what type of construction you're doing, you might actually sell the job, but you haven't figured out what contractors you're using it. You know, so you're going to negotiate all that after the fact. And if you can do that, that's great. That means you know your window of opportunity for costs, then you can negotiate that down.
Yeah, and we see that a lot from the people that have used ClockShark for 6 or 9 months. They start building a database on the different types of labor that's being done on their job, so they can look back at 123 Main Street or the Johnson project, and they can see that, hey, there was a similar type job, and we spent X amount of hours doing this and X amount of hours doing that. So when you're looking at a new job that's similar, you can go in and properly estimate the labor cost that's going to come from that. Because I feel even from 10, 15 years ago when I was in the industry, I felt like labor was one of those things that it wasn't accounted for in enough detail over time, and we'd end up losing money or just breaking even because of labor. So it's one of those things that you really have to get right over time to have a really good understanding.
Well, and could there be missed opportunity on change orders? Hey, they caught one of my guys, on the job and had them add another wall. I mean, it sounds minor, but like that's opportunity for change order, opportunity for more revenue, and if you're kind of tracking and not going deep into the babysitting side, but I mean, like just really tracking those costs, have to be real careful, right? Like it's not, if I can add something, Duane, too, just to help, and I don't know if that's showed up or not, but I just want to specify that labor, material, subcontractor, and indirect, those are considered cost of goods sold, which means I sold a widget and I made a widget. So the made a widget is the cost of goods portion. And then the overhead is considered below, which is where you operate. Office supplies, bank charges, dues and subscriptions, overhead, salaries and wages, things like that.
I think that's good because that's something that you would think is common sense for a business owner, but not everyone goes to school for this. Not everyone takes those courses and all that stuff.
What? Isn't accounting fun? Isn't that why people go in business? Because they love doing their bookkeeping? What?
I love spreadsheets. I don't know what you're talking about.
You know what? You joke, but Michelle on my team, sorry, Michelle, I'm calling you out here, but like she loves spreadsheets. I mean,
There's
for fun.
There's a guy at ClockShark, his name's Michael, that I'm pretty sure he jumps for joy when we say we need him to help with the spreadsheet. Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Yes.
Tangents. So some of the common things that we hear when it relates to job costing. I'll just go back. I think we kind of talked about that all the time. Some of the common things, like I just talked about labor issues and tracking and estimating. You just talked about the cost of goods sold versus the overhead. Is there anything else that comes up or issues or people ask about?
Yeah, I think one of the common things we hear is like cash flow related things. I would say that's a really big monster in itself, but simply job costing can really help improve what that looks like, right? So if you have money in your bank account, that does not mean that you're profitable. Okay? Something to think about.
Yeah.
So if you are able to start tracking those costs, understanding where your money is going, you can simply improve cash flow from that, from that standpoint alone.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I even have that in like joint checking with the wife. If there's money in there, it doesn't mean it's mine.
And then I think profitability is a big thing too, right? So because we want to make as much money on a project as we can, there's no shame in that. Being able to find ways to improve that, because there's nothing worse than finishing the job and finding out, if you're lucky, that you broke even.
Yeah. It's one of the things too is understanding which jobs you should take. Like saying no to projects because in the last 8 you did, you lost money on.
Right. Yep.
I'm not going to take that concrete job because it takes us too long to finish, or we only like to do flooring install or whatever. I think it helps you grow into specific categories as a business owner so that you know where your money is and where you do the best work, rather than being where that term comes from, jack of all trades. Helps you get more specialized and really start growing in specific areas.
Yeah.
Okay. So some of the common roadblocks that come up from job costing, or I think the topic is what are the roadblocks that keep people from job costing?
Okay, so we've got a couple, and I think it'd be kind of good to kind of hit them each individually. So technology, I didn't say it earlier when you brought it up, but I told Duane this before. I'm sure there was a time where that would be considered, like, technology was a swear word. Like, whoa, don't you bring me some technology. I got the system going. It works, right? And just understanding that, yes, there is a lot of technology. We are not as far in technology advance as I would say that we assume we are. Yes, it's 2020, but I think people are always like, they want more, right? You probably see that at ClockShark all the time. Like, can't you just turn this on? Like, it does it over here, but it doesn't do it over there.
You make this button do this over here. Like, sure.
Yeah, and I think I'm guilty of that too. And we want to do more of that, but the problem is that it takes resources and time, right? And there's so many options. So just if I can speak to this, I would say, when you look at technology, test it out or get a demo or get a free trial, talk to somebody about it.
Yeah. And
guide you,
on that, it's don't be afraid to talk to somebody. Like, everyone, I think one, people are afraid to get sold on something. And there are companies out there that try to sell you too often, but in today's world, on getting a demo and talking to someone at a company, more often than not, they're just trying to help you figure out if it's going to be a good fit for you. So go through the process. You may have to painfully talk to someone you're not used to talking to, but when you're exploring new technology for your business, it's new to you. You're not going to be an expert. You're not going to be perfect. Right? When you were 19, 20 years old and you were learning how to finish crown molding, I'm pretty sure it sucked. So getting into technology is going to be the same thing. There's going to be a learning curve. It'll be painful in the beginning, but you got to choose your level of pain on that. And
it takes time. I think people think like, oh, I'm going to get this app tomorrow. It's going to be perfect. And I mean,
wish.
To be realistic, like, just have that mindset and that just know that it does take time. So it's one thing when you implement against one person, like, so in job costing side, we think of just the bookkeeping side. But when you think of project management or employee management, like, try to, we hear a lot like, well, my people out in the field don't know how to use a cell phone. For example.
Yeah, I mean, the second bullet there is getting receipts from employees, not just receipts, getting anything from employees.
Right.
I remember plenty of times when managing a crew and there'd just be people out in the field, or they just wouldn't show up to the shop and grab the work orders. They just go straight to the job site, and then getting information from them. If you track time, for example, on paper, getting them to turn those things in on time with legible handwriting so you can pull the information for job costing, but
And
the
no mud
receipts, everything.
or
Yeah.
footprints
No mud,
or
footprints,
copy.
paint, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. And so having a piece of technology that allows you to capture that information either in live time or automatically, or just limits the need for employee involvement, is going to make it a lot easier. I think one of the roadblocks, one of the biggest ones that I've experienced, is definitely manual involvement from employees, because you're, as a business owner or even a manager, you're not on every job site every minute of every day.
Right. And I'll just give a tip. I know we're probably going to give some tips, but just for the receipt side, and I'm not saying that this is the way, but if you can have them snap a picture with their phone, most people have phones now, right?
Yeah.
So just take a picture, or if you work with certain places that allow you to check out and put a purchase order or a job name or something on there, like there are things out there that allow you to do that. That's outside of just the software piece.
Yeah, I'm a perfect example. I'm not plugging names, but the Home Depot Pro account. That's pretty simple. I use that. I use my old Pro number that I had 10 years ago, and I can go online and look at all the purchases for a project for my house. Like, I'm literally in the middle of building a new covered patio in my backyard. And so I can track everything. It's great.
You don't show your wife, though, what you're
No,
spending on
absolutely
the house.
not.
Got it.
I just spend the points on her, and so she just leaves it alone.
That's right. Good balance. Good balance. Okay.
Yeah, good balance on that. But the other thing is, there's most of the pieces of technology out there, and we've seen this, and even at ClockShark, we've been guilty of it as well at times, where most of the time they're built for the people in the office. Where if you're a owner operator, I'm sure most of you are, you're in your truck going from job to job, and it's really challenging to use pieces of technology when you're in that environment. You don't have time to go back to your office every single day or every hour to go check on things.
Well, and let me add the spreadsheet. So based on the poll question earlier, right? Using Excel spreadsheets, fine, totally normal, very common.
Yes.
Now you want to update that. So let's just say there's two of you. There's you, the owner, and then the project manager. Somebody has to update that spreadsheet for somebody else to be able to see it, right? Yeah. I mean, those are definitely roadblocks that happen every day. So what can you do to improve that process, that, in communicating with people on your team, so that you're, kind of not the bottleneck and just using something as simple as Excel spreadsheets, which are still great and we use them, but when you really want the flow to happen, that's where a lot of the stopping happens.
Yeah. And to that point of who's going to update it or who's going to be responsible for it, that's one of the things we see at ClockShark, specifically around the timepiece, is the bottleneck is the supervisor or the field supervisor, the field manager that collects the time, because then they have to go and put it in and then report it and all that. And if they're doing it for 10 to 12 employees, that takes a long time. And it's a massive bottleneck for a lot of information. So you can't get a work in progress report even generated, because they're not putting that time in until Thursday night, right before the deadline.
Right. If they were putting it in.
If they're putting it in, it's an hourly. And then I wasn't paying attention to the next bullet, but the time it takes.
Yeah.
It takes. Oh. If you're using spreadsheets, it's not a laughing matter. It's still a manual input process.
What if you're busy? Like, I think Duane and I can confidently say that we know what happens in real life, right? Yeah. So here we are talking up here like, oh, job cost, great idea. You should do it. This is how, here's some tips, here's some things. But at the end of the day, like, who has time? You're going all day. Let's say you're not even out in the field. You're just running your business all day, and then it's whatever, 8:00 before you sit down and you're like, great. Can I please start working on my receipts and start putting in all my costs, and start billing my clients, like things like that. So we just know that in general, like, it just takes a lot of time. And when we think like, oh, okay, I'm only a week behind, a week goes into 2 weeks, into a month. And it's sometimes hard enough to remember what happened 2 weeks ago because the train just moves that fast.
Yeah, 100%. So, you forget one thing or push one thing off, then it turns into 10, 12, 20. And then you just have a random bill you send out and hopefully it gets paid.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
all right. Next poll question. How often does inaccurate job costing affect your finances? Never, rarely, sometimes, or frequently, or there's not an option in there, but I don't know. That's probably where I'd land my question. I don't know if it affects my finances, but how often does inaccurate job costing affect your finances? Never, rarely, sometimes, or frequently.
I'm just going to say too, when we have a business, okay, we go into business doing something that we either know, have a hobby about, or love doing, or passionate about. And then you get in there and then you're like, oh, okay, wait a minute. I actually have to like keep track of the financial side of my business, which is not typically something that people do. So when you think of job costing, like it's hard to just start with that from the very beginning, right? You need to have a good base setup, a good accounting software, some apps that you're using, everything's set up correctly. Then you have to have financials that are accurate, not on a job costing standpoint, but just accurate. Accounts are reconciled.
What do you mean by accurate?
You can look at your profit and loss and balance sheet and trust it, or know that the numbers are right.
That trusting part. I'm sure we can do a whole episode on just that.
Yeah, right. How to trust your P&L and balance sheet.
Yeah.
And then you really, once that happens, then you can move into the job costing. So just understand that like, it's kind of hard to just jump right into job costing without some of these other things really being in line first. Yeah,
definitely. Thanks for everyone joining in on those poll questions. I love the engagement. I have most everyone jumping in on those, and it's no one selected never. So at some point, somebody has problems because of job costing. And unfortunately, it's the majority of the time. Sometimes infrequently was the top two answers that were chosen. I think 6 people out of everyone on this call chose rarely, and 0 said never. So it's definitely an issue. And I think what we've been talking about the last couple of slides is the roadblocks, the mental fatigue, technology overload, things that affect a lot of people from doing it.
And just having a whole team, like, when they say like, it takes a village, like you're like, it takes a village, but I need the village people to also like work together. Do their part.
It's not just one person steering the ship.
Right.
That's
sure. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so tips for better job costing. The thing you've all been waiting for is, like you just said, track your financials. Get to a point where you can trust your P&L and know that the numbers are right, so you can begin the process of job costing.
Yep. So get an accounting software. Number one, Excel spreadsheets. I can tell you right now, from an accounting standpoint, you're already doing more work. So I could take some work away from accounting and move it into potential future job costing just by getting an accounting software.
Well, imagine the time saved too. Like if you're spending at least one hour a day doing all of the input and all the calculations and everything manually, where else could that time go? Yeah.
And then when you start adding the software apps, you have to remember that a lot happens behind the scenes when you use the front end functions, right? So someone's clocking time, it does A, B, C, D, E on the back end, but automatically populates that information. When you're using spreadsheets separately, you have to go to this spreadsheet and then go to this spreadsheet and then go to this spreadsheet. There's no good system there.
I run into that now just with the little stuff. I forgot, I'm like, oh crap, I got to go update this report, update that report because they're not connected. And then again, better job costing, you got to develop a process with your subcontractors and vendors. So that way you're not just getting invoices for things that might have been done.
Or, hey, Mr. Owner of company, I just got done with that and I'm walking down the driveway. Can I get paid right now? Like,
good point.
That happens, right? Or, hey, I'm writing checks. So good ways to communicate with them, getting copies. I think we've come a long way over the last couple of years, even on receiving some of that information, but can you get put on account? If cash flow is something that you're looking, that affects your business, can you spend on a credit card or get on account with the lumberyard and pay every 30 days instead of paying every time? Don't use your debit card with some of these vendors at, if Home Depot or whatever. Like there's just all these little things we can do from an accounting standpoint to just really help make that better. And communication with them is big.
I mean, that's something that I do, that I developed a habit of a long time ago, was I don't spend out of my checking account because I feel like that you don't get to categorize anything, and it's not a consistent way to fund certain things. So
and you can't control it.
Yeah, it's not something. So with the credit cards or on account, it's a lot easier to have a consistent flow, be able to pay things off, all that stuff. And plus, most of the time accounts and credit cards and such have points that you can add back into the business.
There's no shame in that game. I'm with
No.
it.
Points junkie. You have like 4 different credit cards. They all have great points.
Yeah.
Costco, 4% on gas, done all day long.
Well, when it comes to cash flow with and I, for the debit side, but like, if you've got payroll next week and someone's constantly on the debit card and you're like, okay, I have money right now, but in 2 days, that money is going to get depleted.
Yeah.
These are little things that you can do to make it better. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And then getting your team on board. We just mentioned having the village. Having the team on board with this process is going to make it a lot easier on you. 100%.
And it's tough. Like I know when we talk to people right off the bat, it's like, hey, I'm on board, but like I have 3 more people or 10 more people that I have to get. And if you think of incorporating software, new processes, people's roles are changing with those new processes and software, like that's hard. So maybe just pushing through that roadblock, I think, is a big thing, right? Because they're like, no one's ever going to follow. No one's ever going to do that on my team. And I try to tell them, like, listen, this is probably the worst advice, but like, you're the boss, right? We all want to work smarter, not harder. Yeah. We're all trying to make this for the right reason. Again, we're not in business because the sky is blue. So what can you do? Baby steps, maybe pieces to get your team on board to help like have a well-oiled machine kind of moving
Definitely.
forward.
Yeah. And the tools alongside of that. It's like, what are some tools that people can use to help with job costing?
Yeah. And we talked mostly it's apps, software apps. Again, there's a lot of software out there, a lot. And it is hard to navigate which kind of software you should go with. And just know too, that there could be more than one software that you should be implementing. It's sometimes hard to find an all-in-one. And if there's all-in-one, great, but find out what is important to you in your real life business. Do not try to accommodate yourself or accommodate the software. I probably said that wrong. Yeah. I think a lot of people do that. Like, I'm just going to change what I'm doing because this is what the software wants me to do. And we all know change is super hard to begin with. So I would say find a professional, find someone who's familiar with that software, if that's what you need, right? And then have them do the workarounds or figure out how your everyday process affects the software that you're using and what is a good workflow or process that you can implement to make your life easier, because that's what it's supposed to be doing, not make your life harder. Well,
the cool thing about there being so many different pieces of technology out there and different tools, excuse me, there's ones that are built specifically for what you're doing. So don't think that just because you've been using one thing for a long period of time, that's the only thing you have to use. Going and finding something that's going to do exactly what you need and is built for your industry, it's going to save you a lot of time and headache than just trying to do what you just said, create a whole bunch of workarounds for a system that wasn't really built for that. And so there's plenty of systems out there. It just takes a few minutes searching on Google to go find something.
Yeah. Yep. And this is where like doing a demo, like making a phone call, yes, we are in the technology age where, email and text and messages everywhere is popular, but I'm still pick up the phone, find out the 5 things that are important to you, see if that software does that, or what are the 5 or 3 problems you're dealing with, and can that software solve that? Because that's really what the intention should be when you're, incorporating applications into your process.
Couldn't agree more. All right. So flowing into Q&A, I know everyone's been flowing tons of questions in, so I really appreciate that. So if there was any that kind of stood out that either Felicia or Michelle, you guys want us to answer live, go ahead and bring them up. And you can unmute yourself if you feel like reading it out loud instead of us having to read it. Or if we answered them all in chat, we being Michelle or Felicia.
When we say we really mean Michelle and Felicia.
Yeah, exactly. We talk.
Let's see. Let me find one. There was some really great questions. So I'm trying to sift through some that might help everybody, not just 24-hour bookkeeper or just ClockShark customers. So give me just 1 second. Oh, I think this one was a good one. I work in the office handling all the invoice and day-to-day paperwork. How do we charge per job for my time? That's a really good one. The difference between, I'm assuming, the direct labor, overhead costs, and all of that. Where would her labor go in as an office employee on the job?
Sure, you're going to push that to me, so I'll just jump right in and go. So this is where the overhead costs matter. So there's different ways, and it goes a little bit deeper than maybe what I'm going to say today, but can you allocate your total wage per job at, ideally we don't want to do it at the end of the year, but that's one way, right? Or can you take your monthly or weekly time and allocate it to what you worked on, because maybe you should be logging time if you're doing that. Now, if you're admin, I think it should go into the admin bucket of other expenses that are related to managing things like document management, software, overhead, wage, salaries and wages, things like that. So if you can take all those totals together and then give it an allocation in, figure out the unit of measure, whether it's by hour or by job, that would be, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be something. And then the more you continue to track it, the better you'll get at knowing what that number should really look like. So hopefully I answered your question.
All right, we have another really good question. Can you give a definition of labor burden and how to best apply it?
Oh, that's all you.
Oh, wow. Dwayne, I was looking for you for that one. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, labor burden is the employer portion of an employee's wage. Social Security, employer portion, 6.2%, or 6.2%. Medicare, 1.45%. Federal and state unemployment, because that is a employer-only expense. If you have any state, there's a couple states that do require you to pay tax on that employee. And then everything else. So things like if you do telephone, if you provide a telephone, help me here, allowance. Okay. If you have fringe benefits, health insurance, you could really get deep into what some of that looks like, but at the minimum, it's the employer taxes. Oh, and workman's comp is usually considered labor burden if we're calling it labor burden and not necessarily on the line item of financial management. But that answers your question.
I learned something there.
Yeah. Employer expense portion of the employee's wage. All right, we have another one.
Yeah.
No, I think that was the main ones. We have some ClockShark related questions that I have been running through. Lots of good stuff coming up with ClockShark, so stay tuned. A lot of you guys are asking about, estimates and things like that. But yeah, I think everything is really, really good. I can check the questions one more time.
Yeah, one just came in.
There you go. Yeah, what applications can you recommend for estimates? And that's a good question.
What ones could we do for estimates? I don't know. That's a really good question. It just it depends on how you do your estimates, because we've got people that use QuickBooks for doing estimates because they tie our tasks into payroll items so they can run reports on time spent per job. There's other programs out there like Sage 100 Contractor or Sage 300 that they use for estimating. They can do, I know Sage has work in progress reports they can do as well based on time sent in. So it depends on the level or detail of estimates that you want to do, because there's a system out there that'll do it. I'd say there's a small handful that really incorporate everything. But a lot of our customers, they get QuickBooks to do it. I don't know, Karen, have you experienced anything like that?
So I'm going to give kind of an overall answer, because this is the attorney answer. That's like, it depends.
Yeah.
I would say when you're thinking about, and we're just talking about estimates, and I know that, but we're really got to think about what they call your tech stack, right? Mm-hmm. So what are you using for estimating? What are you using for time tracking? What are you using for project management? So depending on what your tech stack looks like, you can find a software that has estimating within it or estimating standalone. I would say, like, when it comes to picking, I mean, there's probably a number of softwares that you can just Google, you know, estimating software. And the ideal situation would be it integrates with what other applications you're using. So that would be my recommendation, because it really depends how you're estimating. Do you build houses? Do you have a janitorial company? Do you, you know, do field service, or are you in solar? I mean, who knows how you're really estimating. So you really have to find the software that's going to give you the line item or units of measure that's appropriate. And
yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you Google estimating for carpet cleaning, something's going to come up. There's thousands of pieces of software out there. They're going to be able to get it done for you.
Yeah. Yep.
Speaking of software, we have another question. What is a good WIP software, work in progress software?
Oh, that's a tough question. Okay. Duane, do you have any suggestions? I can jump in after you.
I have mentioned the work in progress thing a couple of times. One of the popular ones that ClockShark does integrate with is Sage. We specifically integrate with Sage 100 Contractor, and it depends on how you have it set up, but they have a work in progress a report in there that they can generate. It's typically more on the higher end. They have Sage 300 as well, which is more of an ERP system. And it's been a while since we've worked with them, but there is a company out there called Notify. They specialize in construction job costing. They bring in the hours, they bring in the material, they integrate directly with QuickBooks, so that way you can get work in progress reports. I forget exactly how they've done it. They've done a lot of updating in the past year, but that's definitely a company that I'm familiar with that does the detailed job costing that's built for it.
Yeah, and I would say I'm going to add, so there's a couple more, but I'll add, and again, it depends what kind of work you do. So this is not necessarily going to be a fit for everybody, but like Red Team Software has a good work in progress report that's instantly produced. I'm going to tell you what we do in our business. We at times will still use a Excel spreadsheet, and I'm just being honest. So I mean, we want to automate, right? Work smarter, not harder, as much as possible. But sometimes if you're using different, you know, if your tech stack includes different, you know, piece of information, if you have a project management software and QuickBooks or Sage or, you know, ClockShark or whatever it may be, you might have to pull information from different places, and that might be a little bit challenging. So we do have it on a manual basis. There are some companies that have it, but sometimes it's hard to get a full-fledged WIP report because of what you're trying to accomplish in completing that WIP report.
Yeah.
You know, so good luck with that.
Yeah, like you said, it depends on what you need done.
Yeah.
And so you gotta be prepared to provide the data for those pieces of software to communicate and get the reporting done.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's questions. If anything comes up afterwards, here is a way to get a hold of ClockShark, right? So follow us on social media. We share product updates, feature enhancements. This is where we share a lot of our webinars. We actually have a Facebook group called Aces Reef that we do a lot of that stuff on. Actually, a gentleman that's on the call today, his name is Hans, runs that, and you'll see his smiling face in there all the time. So we've got the good old email, hello@ClockShark. That's the easiest way to get a hold of us. You can chat in, go to our website, and there's a little bubble at the bottom that you can chat in. You'll get a live person within a couple of minutes. You can, the good old Twitter, the Get ClockShark, Facebook, Instagram, good old LinkedIn as well. And then of course, similar stuff over at 24-Hour Bookkeeper.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we have it as cool as you, but we've got some, you can definitely find us on LinkedIn. You can, go right to our website. You can have a conversation with us through our chat box on our website. And we've got a team here that can help answer some questions and how we can help you move forward. There's a lot going on with this, but you can definitely look for us there. We do have some stuff coming out on LinkedIn, so be on the lookout for that. We do have a group right now on the Facebook side, but we are going to be moving that over to LinkedIn. So be on the lookout.
Good old LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's a place to be.
Well, all right. We appreciate everyone for being on the call today. If you like we just mentioned, if you have any questions or need additional information, be on the lookout for that email tomorrow for both ClockShark and 24-hour Bookkeeper. And then you saw the contact information, go follow us, go email us, chat in, call, any of the above, and we'll get you taken care of.
Yeah. Thanks.